Hello, everyone. Welcome to Easy Dharma for Difficult Times. These are some evening sessions that myself and Pastor David will be doing every day. We'll be taking turns to just share some Dharma with all of you, little bits and pieces, something that's easy to understand and practice in daily life. So, the first topic that I'm going to be talking about is the Four Noble Truths. And Today, I'll be going over the first noble truth, and for the subsequent noble truths, you'll have to join in and watch my future live streams. So, the Four Noble Truths are actually the very fundamentals of Buddhist practice. And when you think about Buddhism, the first thing that comes to mind is actually the Four Noble Truths. Now, when a lot of us who are actually practicing the Dharma, we think about the Four Noble Truths, we usually kind of skip over them. We think we know them already, and so we skip over them, and we don't tend to pay enough attention or enough importance on the Four Noble Truths as it should be. Now, those of you who know the story of the Buddha know that after he gained enlightenment, the first teaching he ever gave was actually the Four Noble Truths. And all subsequent teachings are actually built upon the foundation, which is the Four Noble Truths. So knowing and understanding the Four Noble Truths is actually key to any Buddhist practice. Now, when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, we think about it and we maybe discuss it with other people or we read about it. But not many people know actually how to implement what the Four Noble Truths are actually teaching us. Because in essence, what the Buddha gave us with the Four Noble Truths is he gave us the key to personal transformation. And that transformation isn't in the hands of anybody else, it's in your own hands. You implement what you learn about the Four Noble Truths into your life, and you can actually transform it. Because the Buddhist path, the way that Buddha Shakyamuni taught, is all about self-transformation until you reach enlightenment. So I'm just going to go over briefly what the Four Noble Truths are. The first noble truth that the Buddha taught is actually there is suffering. Now, when people think about that, and when people first read that the first noble truth is there is suffering, everybody tunes out. You really don't want to know anymore because you actually don't want to know that you're suffering. You just don't want to know about it. The second is that suffering actually has its causes. All the sorts of suffering that we actually go through comes from somewhere. And this is what the Buddha was trying to explain. The third noble truth is that all suffering ceases, it stops. No matter what sort of suffering it is, one day it will eventually stop. And the fourth noble truth that the Buddha taught was that there is an actual path out of suffering. There is a way to escape or get out of this suffering that we go through in daily life. And here, this is the most transformational aspect of it. Because the Buddha taught you the way to overcome it. I'm not going to get too much into the fourth noble truth today because I'm going to concentrate on the first noble truth. But actually, even within all of them, all four of them, Buddha left us a key. And that key is actually a method to transform your life. And this method is step by step. So today we're going to be focusing on the first noble truth. There is suffering. Now the word suffering itself is an English translation of the Sanskrit or Pali word, which is duk or dukkha. In its original form, it has more of a meaning than just suffering. It actually means being unsatisfied. And what the Buddha actually meant by this was that anything you do in life, there will always be a sense of dissatisfaction. You will be dissatisfied. Now, when we're talking about negative situations in life, we all know that we're not satisfied with that. But actually, even if you think about positive situations in life, there is also a sense of dissatisfaction. And usually this comes about because these positive situations in life will actually end. So what the Buddha was trying to convey is that no matter what you do in life, there will always be some sort of dissatisfaction, whether good or bad. In general, the Buddha described suffering in three ways. Okay, so I'm just going to go over it briefly. The first way that the Buddha described suffering is known as the suffering of general suffering. Now, this is what everybody usually calls suffering. It's what we usually think about when we think about suffering. It is the emotional, it is the mental, and it is the physical suffering that we go through in life. Any situations we have, I'm sure that you can think about, even your own situation right now. If you think about it, you are going through some form of suffering. But the point that the Buddha was making when he talked about this type of suffering is that even though you're going through it, you haven't realized that you're going through it. Okay? And I'm sure everybody out there is thinking, how that doesn't make any sense. If I'm going through emotional turmoil or if I'm physically injured, I know that I'm suffering. Okay? In these cases, yes, you do. But then what do you do about it? Usually what we do is we actually get caught up in the suffering in the moment. And all we do is think about how to stop that suffering. But we're only thinking about that one suffering. Okay? So this is the first sort of suffering that the Buddha talked about. The second sort of suffering that the Buddha actually talked about was what is known as the suffering of change. Now, this is actually a bit more subtle. It means that when circumstances change, we become unhappy, we become dissatisfied. And I'm going to give you a very simple example that is going to sort of elucidate what the suffering of change means. Now, I'm live streaming from Malaysia, and Malaysia is an extremely tropical country. So on most days, it is extremely hot outside. And coming from London, I'm always feeling extremely hot when I'm outside. So when I am standing outside and walking around, the only thing I can usually think about is going straight indoors and turning on the air conditioning. Because I think as soon as I get indoors and turn on the air conditioning, I'm going to be happy because it's going to be nice and cool. So I'm outside, I'm suffering, I'm sweating. I really don't like the heat. So I go straight indoors, turn on the air conditioning, and I'm fine, I'm happy, I'm satisfied. But the thing is, the satisfaction doesn't last, because here is where the dissatisfaction comes into it. After a while I'm indoors and I'm cooling off, eventually I'm going to get too cold. And when I get too cold, I begin suffering again. So I'm thinking, oh, I better turn off the air conditioning. So I'll turn it off. But then, as the heat builds up in the room, I start becoming dissatisfied again and I have to turn the air conditioning off. After a while, the only thing I can think about is actually going back outside into the heat. So this is an example of the suffering of change on a very basic physical level. Okay? It's all about being hot and being cold and not being satisfied with being either in a hot situation or a cold situation. But the suffering of change actually includes a lot more than just that. The suffering of change also includes emotional states. Okay? So maybe you have a good relationship with your parents, but maybe something happens, maybe you have an argument, and for the rest of the day, things aren't good between yourself and your parents. Okay? You probably feel hurt, you probably feel dissatisfied, and in fact, your parents are probably feeling the same way. This actually is the suffering of change again, because you think that you're happy in one situation, and then when you enter another situation and the circumstances are different, it makes you unhappy. Okay? So I know a lot of us are actually at the moment under the movement control order here in Malaysia. And in other places around the world as well, people are at home. We're at home, and we think that in literal terms, we're suffering because we're actually stuck indoors. We can't do the things that we're normally used to doing. So this is actually the suffering of change. Because we are used to a certain way of living, which is being able to go out, being able to enjoy so-called freedom when you're out, and now we're indoors, it could and does lead people to think and believe that they are suffering. Okay? Now, bear with me for a moment. This might sound depressing, but once I finish explaining the sufferings, I'm going to explain how in Buddhism, you can actually use this to your advantage. You use this to your advantage and you literally transform your mind. Okay? The third suffering that the Buddha talked about is known as the suffering of existence. And this is a lot more subtle. I'm not going to get too into it today, but in a gist, it basically means that anything we do in life, any decision that we take, is going to include some sort of suffering. Whether we think that the action is positive and will actually bring us benefit, it won't, because there is some sort of suffering. Now, this is on a normal, everyday, today level. Okay? So now I'm going to talk about it from a spiritual level, from what the Buddha taught us about suffering. Now, as I was saying before, when people think about the Four Noble Truths, they get turned off and they don't want to know anymore, and they feel depressed. It's, oh no, it's the Four Noble Truths again. I don't want to know that I'm suffering. Just block it out my mind and move it away. Actually, the Buddha taught the first noble truth. Taught suffering as the first noble truth to actually shock you. It's to shock you into realizing that there is a problem. Because as with anything in life, if you want to solve any situation, to be able to solve it, you need to know, realize, and accept that there is a problem first. And only then can you move on to the methods of understanding where the problems actually came from and then overcoming them. So the Buddha taught us suffering first because he wanted us to contemplate our suffering. Okay? I've talked about 3 levels of suffering that we actually go through. But we actually only operate on the first one, which is general suffering, emotional and physical suffering that we actually go through. We don't actually concentrate on things like the suffering of change or the suffering of existence. And if we do contemplate it, we fall into this very bad habit of getting caught up in the suffering. Because you start thinking about your suffering, and then you start suffering because you're thinking about suffering. Okay? This isn't actually what the Buddha wanted. The Buddha wanted this contemplation of suffering to actually give you an impetus. He wanted you to have the drive to actually want to overcome this suffering. And this is the journey that the Buddha taught. This is the journey of self-transformation. Okay? And the way that the Buddha explains it, which I'll be explaining in my next videos, is through the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Noble Truths. So instead of actually thinking that suffering is a negative thing, the Buddha is actually trying to teach you that you can use suffering. Don't get caught up in it, but use it. Use it so it can be a drive to actually change your life. Okay? It's the impetus that you need. Now, a lot of people have been actually asking, okay, we're in our homes now. What can we do? And what should we do from a spiritual angle? And the answer is very simple. work on your self-transformation. And the first part is obviously know that you're suffering and contemplate it. But once you've done that, use it. Don't keep it there. Don't stop there. Use it to provide the drive that you need. What is that drive? That drive is doing more Dharma, reading Dharma books, learning more Dharma, engaging in meditation, chanting more mantras, engaging in a retreat perhaps, because now is the best time that you're going to get to actually practice the Dharma. Okay? So that actually covers all of what I wanted to talk about in today's session, which covers the first noble truth. And over the next couple of sessions that you have with me, I'll be talking about how to think about and implement the third to the fourth noble truths. Okay, so now I'm just going to check if we have any questions. Okay, there isn't any questions, but there is a post that was put up by Benkui. And she's basically reiterating what the Four Noble Truths are. So the first one is the truth of suffering. So the Buddha taught basically, know what the problem is. The second is the truth of the origin of suffering, knowing why the problem is there, knowing where the problem actually comes from. The third is that suffering ends, to know that there is a solution. Now, this is a good point. Even when I'm talking about the first noble truth, this is a very good point. Suffering in all its form will actually end. And there is always a solution to any form of suffering that we actually go through, no matter if it's physical or if it's mental or if it's emotional. So if you are going through situations in life where perhaps you're not having the best family life, or you're not getting along with certain people or friends or even colleagues at work, there are methods that you can implement according to the Dharma, which actually help you to improve these situations. And this is number 4, which is knowing the path to liberation, to get out of your suffering. And this itself is the solution. So the solution that the Buddha talked about is actually the practice of the Dharma. Okay, so I've got another question here by Mr. Lam. He asks, is the root cause of suffering ignorance? Now, from a Buddhist perspective, I'm not going to get too much into it because I'll be talking about it in the next session, which is on the causes of suffering. But in essence, we have 3 things that cause a suffering, that are the causes of suffering, and that is our ignorance, our hatred, and our desire. Now, collectively, these are known as the 3 poisons within Tibetan Buddhism. So any action that we take that is not based on the Dharma, that is not based on self-transformation, is actually based upon one of these 3 things. And the results of that are always going to lead to some form of suffering. Because if you actually look at your actions on a daily life, all of them most probably are based on one of these 3 things. So in essence, yes, it is based on ignorance and many forms of ignorance. Okay, so Ben Kui asks, in practical terms, how to apply the first noble truth in daily life. Okay. I've kind of spoken about it before a while ago, but the way to actually implement the first noble truth is knowing that there is a problem. A lot of us go through life, we wake up in the morning, we make our breakfasts, we maybe drop off the kids to school if they're going to school, and then we go to work, and then we're at work, we do the job, we have our lunch, we still go back to work again, and then we're off work, we maybe go out with colleagues to have a meal or whatever, and then we come back home, we lounge around for a couple of hours or do the housework, and then we go to sleep again. This is a daily routine that everybody goes through in one form or another throughout their lives. And actually, the majority of our lives is actually spent doing that. When we're in that, yes, there are problems that come up. Yes, there are situations that we feel that we are suffering, but overall, we don't actually go through life thinking about suffering. If you actually just take a moment, take 5-10 minutes in a day, even today, I mean, you can do this right now. You can sit there, you can relax a little bit, okay? And you can think about your life today. What did you do today? You woke up. After you woke up, what did you do? Did you make your breakfast? Did you speak with your kids? Okay? Did you do some work at home? Okay, and after that, what did you do? Maybe you cooked your dinner, and now you have some free time on your hands. You're maybe, you're sitting down at this precise moment. You're watching me on live streaming, but then after that, what are you going to do? Okay, think about that, and think about what in your life today actually is a form of suffering. Because everything you did today, there is suffering involved in it. You just have to think about it. But then what I want you to do is I want you to take that experience or that understanding that you went through that suffering, and I want you to use it, and I want you to harness it to give you that drive to actually overcome that suffering. So if you are at home today, maybe you're feeling a bit bored because, you did everything that you needed to do. You cooked, you spent time with your family, maybe you did some work, but then after that, what did you actually do? What do you spend your time doing? If you have free time on your hands, you should use that to your advantage. Use it to your advantage to improve yourself. Actually spend time, if you're a parent, spend time with your kids. Actually learn about how your kids feel. How can you improve your relationship with your kids? And then implement it. Same with your family. Even if it's not your kids, if it's your brothers or your sisters, if you're with your family at home, how can you improve your relationships with them? Okay? If it's not that, if you're there by yourself, how can you improve your life? Is there a skill that you wanted to learn that you never did? Now is the perfect time to do it. Okay? From a spiritual perspective, actually, now is the perfect time for you to improve yourself. It's to transform yourself. Why? Because you have time to do it. Okay? This is the key to implementing the first noble truth in daily life. It is to be able to draw that inspiration and that drive from understanding that you're suffering. Okay, let's see what else we have. Okay, Sheen Koi actually wrote, I suffer because I mistrusted someone who was very close to me. I tried very hard to forgive him, but it's almost a year already, and I still can't even, though I tried chanting very frequently to pass the time of not thinking of him. Now, in your case, Sheen, what's happened is that you have accepted the fact that you're suffering because of something that happened. Now, this isn't just a case specific to you. Actually, everyone will go through this at a certain point in their life. When the hurt that we have perceived that we have been, that somebody else has afflicted on us, actually, we hold on to it too tight. And when we hold on to it, it basically overtakes our thinking. And it creates a lot of emotional upset and a lot of emotional baggage that over time actually builds up. Now, the key here is to actually learn to let go of your suffering, okay? And you're probably thinking, how am I going to do that? Now, there are certain steps that you can take to try and overcome your suffering, okay? So some of them include chanting, others include meditation. One thing that you can do is that when these feelings do actually come up and you feel yourself in the throes of that emotional suffering, you can sit down and just engage in breathing meditation. Breathing meditation is a very good key, it's a very good method that you can actually use to calm your mind when you're in these situations. Now, I know that we have, JP is doing live streams of breathing meditation in the morning in English, and I know that Pastor Shin is also doing a similar thing in the morning in Chinese. Now, if you want, log on at these times. You can check the Chichara Forest Retreat Facebook page for the times and the schedules of when that will be on, and actually you can follow it. When you follow this on a daily basis, you actually find your mind becoming calmer, and also you're able to deal with emotional baggage and emotional issues a lot better. Okay? But the first thing which you've already done is actually you have already taken the step to recognize that you are suffering and you want to do something about it. Now, that is what the Buddha was looking for when he taught the actual first noble truth. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions. Okay, we have a question by Sharon Ong. Hello. How does knowing the first of the noble truths help us through difficult times? Okay. The way in which it helps us is because it shocks you into actually thinking about it. When we're actually going through difficult times in life, we don't usually think about it. We think about the solution to the immediate problem, but we don't actually think about how these difficult times can actually be used to transform our lives. Okay? Which is, it's what the Buddha was trying to get us to do, is to talk about suffering, it's to contemplate it, all the difficult times that we might be going through, especially now in this day and age, specifically at this time, we're all going through some form of difficult times in our lives. And it is the perfect opportunity to actually think about it and understand it. But then, after understanding it, is actually to use it to change our situation, to change the way we think, to change the way we interact with people, to make our lives more compassionate and more meaningful and more beneficial to others. Okay, I've got a question from Jerry Go. I hope I pronounced your name right. Why is it called First Noble Truth? Okay. So those of you who know the story of the Buddha, when he achieved enlightenment under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, he taught the Dharma for the first time, And what he taught were these four things. And the reason why they're called noble truths was explaining to us the truths that he had seen and he had understood and had taken him along the path towards enlightenment. And the reason why they're called noble is the word noble actually comes from the Indian word Arya. Arya actually means spiritually advanced or spiritually attained. So when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, these four things are the enlightened truths that you could say, or the four ways in which that you can become enlightened. That's why they're known as noble. Hence, they're known as noble truths. And the truth that I've been covering today is only the first one, which is that there is suffering. And to understand that in all of our lives, we do go through problems in one form or another. So that's why they're called the Four Noble Truths. Thanks, Jerry. Thank you. I pronounced your name correctly. Hi, JP. Okay. Let's see if there's any other questions. Okay, so far there's no other questions, so I'm going to leave it there. Again, just to recap very quickly, the first of the Four Noble Truths is that we're actually going through some form of suffering, but the Buddha didn't want us to stop there. The Buddha wanted to use that knowledge and contemplation of our suffering to actually transform our lives for the better, which is what I'll be covering in my next couple of sessions with you. So that's enough from me for today. Tomorrow's live streaming, Easy Dharma for Difficult Times, will actually be held by Pastor David here at the same time of 9 p.m. on the Kuchara Facebook page. So that's it from me. Stay home, stay safe, and stay spiritual. Thank you.